Hi, my name is Clare Riesman. I'm the assistant manager of the Chadwick Garden, and today in the garden we're installing micro sprinklers, and I wanted to show you all how to do it so you can do it yourselves. In the garden, we're really focused on water conservation. Water is a precious resource and we want to use as little of it as we need to. In this case, the trees that we have here are young trees, and we've planted them really closely together. Not because this is going to be their final destination, but we've got kind of a nursery set up here. We're parking them here for a year, let them grow out a bit, and then we're going to move them somewhere else. So, given the needs of a young tree and its really small root system and how closely we've planted it, we need an irrigation system that's going to provide water everywhere where the roots are and not starve any roots of water, especially because young trees are pretty sensitive to drought. A micro sprinkler system provides a much more thorough overhead watering that makes sure that there's water everywhere the roots are going to be. The other advantage of the system that we're using today is that it's very adaptable and very movable. Because we cover crop under our trees in the winter, we need to be able to access and not be stepping on and breaking our micro sprinkler systems. So this system we're able to lift it up into the trees in the winter so we can get under, cover crop, and also remove the cover crop without damaging the system. It's all above ground, so we don't need to dig in order to access and change and modify the system. And we can just easily cut into the tubing. We don't need any special tools. All of the fittings are hand tightened. We don't need any glue or anything. It's all very changeable as our needs in this space change as well. So for all these reasons, we've chosen micro sprinklers for this planting. So an overview of the tools and materials you'll need for this installation. One is 1/2-inch poly tubing, and you're going to want to measure out the length you're going to need. And this is what we call distribution line. It does not have emitters along its surface. It's just moving water from one place to another, and we're going to plug our micro sprinklers into it. Second are the poly tubing fittings and the orientations you're going to need them. So they make them in couplers, elbows, and T's. There's two types of fittings that we'll be using today: the compression fittings and the twist lock fittings. You can use them interchangeably. The twist lock is more expensive, but they're a little bit easier to use. Additionally, we're using some compression fittings that adapt to hose fittings on the end. So we have both the female and the male versions, or the internally threaded and externally threaded ends as well. Needle nose pliers will be helpful. We're also going to need some hole punches, which will allow us to plug our micro sprinklers into our line. Also, we're going to need micro sprinklers. This is from a brand called Nan Dan Jane, and we've been really happy with them over the years, but you can pick the right micro sprinkler for your situation. You'll also need a sturdy pair of garden clippers as well to cut the poly tubing. So the first thing you want to do when designing and installing a new irrigation system is sort of lay out everything you're going to use and make sure everything can fit, is in the right place, you have the right fittings, etc. So I'm going to start at my water source, which here is my hose bib, and I'm going to start my poly tubing here to sort of get the length right and come down. And at this point in this system, this is where I'm going to attach it into the older system. So I'm going to take one of these T's that has the twist lock on all three ends, put it here because I'm going to connect it to my drip tubing here, and then I'm going to use two 90 fittings to climb down this rock wall here. This is where my old system begins. I'm going to remove this hose adapter and just attach it instead with one of these elbows. And I'll also run my poly tubing down the entire length of the bed to ensure I have a long enough stretch of poly tubing to reach everything I want to reach with the irrigation system. So now it's time to start putting the fittings on our system. The fitting I have here is compression on the end that's going to go on the poly tubing, and hose threading, and this is called a hose swivel on the other end. So what I'm going to do is really just shove it on to the end there and get it nice and secure. And then I'm going to attach it to my water source, which again is the hose bib. Moving down the line, we've reached the point at which I want to put the T in. So I'm going to line it up so it's flush with my old system, and I'm just going to cut a straight edge into my poly tubing with my garden clippers. And then I'm going to put the barb of the twist lock on of the T and twist down on one end, and then do that on the other two ends as well. So I'm going to take my sturdy clips, do another nice clean cut, and do the same thing here, attaching the elbow. Tubing goes over the barb, and then I twist to lock. And what I'm going to do down here is remove the old hose swivel from the old system. I'm going to attach one of these elbow fittings, twist it down, and then measure how long the tubing in between will be. An advantage of using polytubing over like PVC here is that polytubing is a lot more forgiving. Poly can wiggle a little more, you could pull it. So I'm going to attach the sort of riser piece to get us up that wall, and we're all connected. The next step is marking out where I'm going to put the micro sprinklers on my line. The number one thing you want to think about here is how far your micro sprinkler throws water and how far it throws sort of a uniform distribution of water. I know from experience and from the specs on this micro sprinkler that it throws a radius of about 3 feet, so a 6-foot diameter. And so I want to put these sprinklers no farther than 6 feet apart. We err on the side of maybe 4 to 6 feet apart in the garden here. So we really want to make sure that there's adequate coverage. The next step after we've laid out where our micro sprinklers are going to go is actually plugging them into the line. So we're going to get our little hole punch here and press it up against, oh, that was a nice satisfying pop there. Press it up against the poly tubing until we've got a hole, and then we'll take the barbed end of our micro sprinkler and just stick it in there. I'm finding I'm having some trouble getting my barbed end into the hole, and so one little tip you can use here is you can take one of these irrigation staples and just stick it in there and wiggle it around a little bit. You don't want to make the hole too big because then it will leak, but you just want to give yourself a little more room to get this barbed end in. And the way to make sure it's in is when you can't see the barb anymore. So at the end of our system, we want to cap it in some way. There's 2 ways you could do this. You could just fold this over and then use a wire twist tie to hold this down. That's totally great, it's super cheap. What we're gonna do is actually put on, on one end compression that fits over poly, and then on the other end, a male or externally threaded hose end. And what this is gonna allow us to do is flush the lines, especially when you haven't used irrigation over the winter. Stuff can get into the lines, and so what we'll do is we'll plug it in and then open the ends and flush it out. So any debris that's collected over the winter just gets flushed out. And this is an end cap situation that allows us to keep it capped for most of the year when we don't want water coming out of it. And then to install this, you just do like we did at the beginning and put the compression fitting over the poly. So after we've laid out our whole system to see that everything fits, our first step is to install our pressure reducer or pressure regulator. This is a little device that keeps it so that your system is running at the right pressure. If you're running your system at too high a pressure, it can pop off a lot of the fittings, so you get more leaks in your system, and it can also increase wear and tear on your system over time. So you want to look at what is the pressure that the manufacturer says the system should be run at, and you'll just get that with the specs on your micro sprinklers, and you're going to find a pressure regulator that brings the water pressure down to that point. You also want to be sure to find a pressure regulator that has the right threading. There's pipe thread and there's hose thread. In most garden systems, you're just going to want to stick with the hose thread. So I have a pressure regulator that is hose thread on both ends. So I can just take it and screw it on to my hose bib. Next, we want to attach our poly tubing to our water source. And so we're going to take our poly tubing and what is called a hose swivel adapter, and it just means there's a compression fitting on one end and a hose fitting on the other, and we will just put the compression fitting over the poly tubing and then using the hose fitting attach it to our pressure regulator. All right, let's turn it on and see how it goes. Everything looks good, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. Additionally, to avoid tripping or if your line's moving around a lot, you can use these irrigation staples to hold the line in place where you want it to be. So those are the basics of setting up a micro sprinkler irrigation system. Like I said, micro sprinklers can be a great solution if you've got young plants or any other situation where you need a lot more coverage than drip can provide. I hope this was a helpful video, and good luck with your backyard irrigation projects.